Hello, I'm James Reynolds from the BBC World Service. This is The Global Story. 10 years ago, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 disappeared shortly after taking off from Kuala Lumpur. An international search and rescue operation was launched. Officials spent more than 4 years and hundreds of millions of dollars looking for MH370. Amateur sleuths have now taken up the search for the missing flight, and their investigation may potentially reveal some of the truth behind its disappearance. Today, we're asking, how do you investigate a flight that disappeared more than 10 years ago? And are we any closer to resolving the mystery of why the plane went down? With me today, Jonathan Head, the BBC South East Asia correspondent. He reported on the disappearance of flights MH370 when it happened, and Jonathan's continued to follow developments ever since. Hi, Jonathan.
Hello, James.
And also with me in the studio is Alessandra Bonomolo, the producer and director of a new documentary on the disappearance of MH370 titled Why Planes Vanish, the Hunt for MH370. Hi, Alessandra.
Hi, James, and thank you for having me.
Alessandra, then a really simple question. When and where did the plane disappear from radar?
The plane took off from Kuala Lumpur airport around 12:45, and after 40 minutes, it disappeared from civilian radar. That happened at a time when there had been communication a few minutes prior, probably as we can reconstruct now, between the pilots and air traffic controllers in Kuala Lumpur, who exchange a brief conversation, which is entirely customary when they say that they're going to move on to a different airspace. In that case, would have been the Vietnamese airspace, and therefore there's a sort of greeting that goes between the two, saying that they're now handed over, in that case to Ho Chi Minh, to the Vietnamese air traffic controllers. So there was a good night exchanged.
Malaysian 370, contact Ho Chi Minh 120.9. Good night. Good night, Malaysian 370.
And after that good night, the air traffic controllers in Malaysia know that they're no longer supposed or responsible for that plane and to follow it through because it entered another nation's airspace. So we can now reconstruct that there was a point, an exact point, at the border between the Malaysian airspace and the Vietnamese airspace when the plane disappeared.
Where did it go? Where did the flight go? Can it just vanish off the face of the earth or into the ocean like that?
Well, planes don't vanish. So what is really baffling about this story and the real mystery about MH370 is because, to our knowledge, it's the only plane that's technically vanished, and it's remained so for 10 years. So we still haven't been able to find the wreckage. Rescuers and investigators haven't been able to find the wreckage, and with it, hopefully, the answers that anyone would want. With the wreckage will come a black box that would reveal information.
Even a decade later?
Possibly, yes. We spoke to experts, also on and off the record, who believe that, yes, given some particular conditions in those depths of the southern Indian Oceans, yes, the black box after 10 years may still work. And black box not only record what would have happened on the cockpit, and at that time would have been only for the last 2 hours, but they do record a set of data that could give us a clue, could give experts and investigators a clue as to what would have really happened. What we know is the plane is very likely to be in the southern Indian Ocean, an extremely deep area, which makes the search for MH370 so difficult.
Jonathan, you went on some of those searches. What was that like?
I went out with the very early stages of the search once they'd realised the plane had gone south, because they assumed there would still be debris on the surface. They sent naval surveillance aircraft out from Australia, which was the nearest landmass from the airbase north of Perth. And we stayed there for quite a long time, probably about a week and a half. and I went out on a New Zealand plane called a P-3 Orion. It's a naval surveillance plane. It was a very interesting trip because they were given strips of water to search, and although they've got fantastically sophisticated surveillance equipment on board these planes, when you're looking for debris, the only way to see it is literally to have people looking out the window with binoculars.
We've been flying for just over 3 hours now, and the plane will shortly descend to just a few hundred feet above the sea. The crew behind me will then move to the windows and start looking out as the aircraft zigzags backwards and forwards across some of the most remote patches of ocean you can find anywhere on this planet.
So, a mystery abhors a vacuum. Just because the search is over doesn't mean that interest is over. And Alessandra, it's fascinating in your documentary to see, what would you describe it, this world of freelance or amateur investigators rising up and proposing their theories. Tell us more about them.
Well, I would call them volunteers investigators, because there's a number of people from different walks of life, different backgrounds who all come together, but most of them share some engineering experience, scientific background, aeronautical or aerospace credentials. Some of them worked for very high-profile companies, and they felt at some point, seeing that there wasn't that much evidence out there, that they could put something forward. They could offer their own skills, expertise to this cause. Again, as a mystery, it sparks a lot of interest from experts and the public opinion alike. But for them, they do feel that given their knowledge, given what they know, given their experience, they could bring something to the table.
Jonathan, I know that in your own reporting, you've come across some of the same people who volunteered their time and their expertise. What's it been like delving into that world of sleuths and investigators working outside official investigations?
Well, it's mixed, James. I mean, what's interesting about MH370 to me is that, on the one hand, it has attracted really smart, switched on people to go down rabbit holes of the most bizarre conspiracies to which they are absolutely committed. There are people who've written books claiming that the plane was shot down by the Americans because it had electronic equipment on board that the Chinese were going to get, or that it was hacked by Russian agents, or that it was taken off into some remote jungles. On the other hand, some of these people are really impressive.
Did you ever get people in the making of the documentary start emailing you and going, look, Alessandra, I know you're making this documentary. I've solved the mystery. You need to read this email.
Well, I must admit there have been a few emails going around because the MH370 community is a very big community, or as we said, amateur sleuths and anything in between. And as Jonathan pointed out, so many people out there with different theories. So clearly, a documentary made about this topic sparks interest in itself.
Are there prevailing hypotheses or theories as to why the plane went down?
The obvious prevailing theory is that the plane was deliberately flown there and allowed to crash into the sea. Whether it was one of the pilots or somebody else possibly took control, most theories say it must be a pilot because the plane was flown very expertly when a lot of its electronics were switched off. What we need to do is find the plane so we can confirm the theories.
Among these experts, we interviewed two Frenchmen. One is called Jean-Luc Marchand. He worked for Eurocontrol, which is a European body for the safety of the aviation industry. And he works with a retired commercial pilot called Captain Patrick Blailly. And together they analysed the official reports, and they also analysed the trajectory that the plane took at the time when it disappeared. And what they saw, as it's been established in the official reports, is that the plane made a U-turn.
This U-turn is a very challenging maneuver because he had to make sure that it disappeared quickly from the Vietnamese sector. The controls are shaking because you're at the limit of the aircraft. and the aircraft is telling you, you are asking me a lot. It demands attention and skill. So that's why we believe it was not an accident.
And the plane made other turns, one around the Penang Island when it started flowing towards the Strait of Malacca. So there have been turns which, to some experts, don't seem conceivable with the use of the automated pilot. So if the plane wasn't flying on automated pilot, then someone must have been in the cockpit, they believe. And who could that be? So considering the expertise that they believe is required and the skills that are required to do those maneuvers, they believe it could only be someone experienced.
Jonathan, thinking about those 10 years, that's a long time in people's lives. In terms of the families, older members of those families die. There are younger members being born. And I wonder, when you speak to people now and they still don't have bodies to bury, graves to visit and answers, what things are like for them.
Well, I think that period of time weighs very heavily on them, and it's been rammed home. I don't know what the statistic is, but the Chinese group told me that several members of their group of family members had died in this long wait for answers. We've got a whole generation now of grandchildren who haven't known their grandparents because they were on board MH370. So it's becoming a generational experience.
Just thinking it took more than 70 years to find the Titanic on the seabed. So really, what if there's not an answer? What if they don't find the plane in the lifetime of the family members?
I think in their heart they accept that they may never find an answer, but still, a number of the families are still going out and advocating and campaigning for a new search to find those answers. But they're still hoping and they're still asking for a new search to happen, to hopefully bring some closure to them and to find answers for them and the aviation community as well.
They want to know, it's not just exactly what happened, but the most important thing, I think, and the hardest thing of all, is the why. Why was that plane suddenly taken off course and flown down to one of the most remote spots on Earth? And I think it is odd to think that in an age where we've managed to answer everything, it does seem extraordinary that we can't find a 200-ton airliner that's sitting on a planet that we tend to think of now as quite small.
Jonathan, what if there's never a why? What if the plane is found and they know where it is, and that provides some consolation, but what if the why is never discovered?
Well, that's a possibility. It's a very sobering thought, actually. I mean, air safety has got so much better in our lifetimes. And when something does happen, we get answers relatively quickly. The idea that something so catastrophic as the loss of such a large plane never gets explained, it's actually probably the hardest thing of all to comprehend. I mean, not just for the families, for people like me and Alessandro. We're journalists, we're used to getting answers. So it's funny you asked me that question, and I think I'm almost as unable to accept that possibility as the families. I think inevitably MH370 will go on sucking people in to try to find answers, and my sense is that with technology and just determination, at some point we'll get those answers. We did get it for the Titanic after all, eventually.
That's very true. I completely agree with that. And once you become invested in the story, not just as a reader, but someone who starts working on the story, going out, meeting the families, looking into the details of what could have possibly gone wrong, you do want to find an answer. You do hope that there will be an answer. And I think if the plane is found, but for some reason it won't give us answers, there will still be something for the families to hang on to, a tangible piece of evidence, a tangible part of the plane, hopefully even human remains, that they can finally find rest in peace. So these are all very, very important elements for the families, for those who still hope that there could be a new search.
Thanks so much to Jonathan Head, the BBC's Southeast Asia correspondent.
Thank you, James. It was great to be able to talk about this extraordinary story.
And also to Alessandra Bonamolo, the producer and director of the documentary on the disappearance of MH370.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being with us. If you want to listen to further episodes of The Global Story, do find us wherever you get your podcasts. Do think about subscribing or leaving a comment below. Goodbye.